Christian filmmaking duo, the Kendrick Brothers' new film, The Forge, forged on through its third weekend of release, dropping a few theaters and losing a little bit of steam as it went up against the Beetlejuice sequel film over this past weekend. So how did The Forge fare? Well, let's take a look at the numbers today. We've been keeping up with The Forge and the Kendrick Brothers a little bit too here on Afterthoughts. So let's get an update. As I mentioned last week, the Beetlejuice sequel film was opening over this past weekend, and it was opening in over 4,500 theaters. Pretty big amount of theaters, pretty massive amount of theaters. For contrast, or for comparison, The Forge was only operating at about 1,800, a little over 1,800 theaters. So I mentioned then last week's video that Beetlejuice is going to come in and probably pull some theaters from some other films like The Forge, because theaters generally want to put a movie onto screens that's going to have the best chance of making a lot of money, right? So The Forge, obviously being a small Christian film, was probably going to lose some theaters. So let's take a look at how it did at the box office and how it did with theaters and theater loss. We'll hop on over to the numbers here quick and take a look at the results. Domestic box office now sitting at 21.1 million. International bumped up a little bit as well since we last looked at it last week for 313,000. We'll look at those numbers in a little bit too. For a total of 21.4 million for the worldwide box office. That's where it's sitting right now. That's where it stands right now. Let's take a look at these domestic box office numbers here. We'll scroll down. It has been in release now for 18 days as of yesterday. Today is September 10th as I record this video. So these numbers go through yesterday, through Monday, September 9th. So 21.1 million basically is where it's sitting right now after 18 days in release and 3 weekends of release. So, and if we look at those weekends, let's pop up here. You can see opening weekend back August 23rd, it pulled 6.6 million. That second weekend in release, August 30th, it pulled 4.6 million. And now here this past weekend that we're talking about, it dropped to 3 million. That's what the film made across the sum total across each of those weekends. So it did drop a little bit, obviously from the previous weekend, 4.6. Each weekend typically drops, longer films out. It often does. And then in terms of the theaters, since we mentioned it would lose some theaters, did it? Well, yes, it did. Again, opening weekend, it was at 1,818 theaters. August 30th, they had got a bump up for that second weekend to 1,921, and now they dropped below that first weekend's amount of theaters with 1,710. Not an awful drop, but still a drop, and that obviously affected box office a little bit too, as was the fact that Beetlejuice opened not only in so many theaters, but just the fact that this was opening weekend for that. So that's going to pull people to go see a new film as opposed to one that's been out for 3 weekends already. But overall, you look at these numbers, really The Forge is holding its own. It is forging on relatively well. And so, I think all things considered, it's holding its own. It's doing okay for a, smaller Christian film. It does have the Kendrick Brothers name going behind it, the credibility of the type of films that they produce and direct. And even the fact that this Forge storyline ties in a little bit to one of their previous films, War Room, which was probably their most popular film at the box office in terms of numbers. In fact, while I got you here, let's go ahead and compare how The Forge is doing, comparing it to all the previous Kendrick Brothers films. Here on the numbers, we can create a chart and actually look at a comparison of all those films. So let's take a look at that quick. I think it'd just be kind of fun. Maybe we can predict a little bit more how The Forge is going to do yet, and what films in the Kendrick Brothers filmography it might be closest to reaching or comparing to. Let's take a look at that real quick. All right, so let's start. We'll just add a film at a time here. First of all, we're going to start with their first film, Facing the Giants, which came out in 2006. This was their football-themed film. They did have a film before that called Flywheel, but that was a very, very small film. We're going to just look at Facing the Giants. It was their first real step into filmmaking and theatrical release. So Facing the Giants, that's the red line here in this particular graph. As you can see, it had a much smaller start, right? I mean, it's Kendrick Brothers' first film. They weren't really known. It was a Christian faith-based film, and so it had a smaller start. And it started to level off at about day 59. So after about 2 months in release, it started to level off, and then it went on to about day 119. Looks like before they pulled it. Here's The Forge, which just went straight up by comparison. So that's kind of interesting. Let's add their next film, which was Fireproof. Okay, so now Fireproof is the blue line here, and Facing the Giants is the orange line on this graph. So there's Facing the Giants. Here you can see Fireproof had a much bigger take and increase, faster rise than Facing the Giants did. So at that point, the Kendrick Brothers were known. This was their second film from, what year was this? This was 2008, a couple years later. And it leveled off about day 60 again, too. So Facing the Giants was day 59. So about then, it starts to level off after about 2 months in. Again, this was many years ago. So film-going and film-going audiences were very different. It wasn't as much to do with streaming, pulling away from theaters the way it is today. All right, and then there's again The Forge climbing. So it's still better than Fireproof. All right, our next film was Courageous. So let's add that to the chart and see how that compares. Courageous came out in 2011, and now we have Facing Giants as the green line, Fireproof's the red line, and the blue one is Courageous. Similar to Fireproof, but it did outdo Fireproof. Again, went up. This one started to level off pretty much about the same, maybe a slight bit earlier, leveled off about day 50. And then it went all the way to day 114, a little bit shorter than how long Fireproof lasted, till 122. And we'll go look at the box office take on each of these in just a minute. But so there's The Forge, now the orange line. So it's kind of mirroring Courageous the most at the moment. In fact, it's really falling right in line with Courageous in terms of performance at the moment. Let's go ahead and add War Room. There we go. War Room is the blue line on this chart. Now look at that. Just a massive breakaway. This was in 2015, so 4 years after Courageous, and this one just took off. I'm not sure why this one so outperformed the others. Again, it levels off about day 60, and it went 108 days. But that one just really outperformed all their others. Maybe it was that year, 2015. Audiences were just very receptive at that point to Christian films. Kendrick Brothers had established a good name for themselves. The subject matter of the film being about prayer, all sorts of things. I don't know. I'd like to study that sometime as to why that film really outperformed. But it may be part of the reason why the Forge storyline ties in to the War Room storyline and the War Room universe and some of those characters. That may be part of why they revisited those characters in the Forge, but or some of those characters in the Forge. Interesting to see that. And then Kendrick Brothers' last film to come out prior to the Forge was Overcomer in 2019. That one here is the orange line now on this graph, and it did not do nearly as well as War Room did, but it did outperform all their other films, at least initially on the rise, and then it started to level off a bit earlier, more around day 40, and then it didn't go as long and didn't make quite as much. It went only about 80 days. So if you scroll down and just look at the films, their overall box office and their budget too. Being a filmmaker, I like to look at their production budget. So The Forge, we don't have a production budget yet. We'll come back to that in a minute. Facing the Giants, their 2006 football film, they had a budget of $100,000, very small for a film, and I think they shot that whole film with one camera. if I remember correctly. And that made, this of course was their first film, made 10.2 million. So, you know, a good haul for a $100,000 budgeted film. I don't know what any of these spent on marketing, so I can't really comment on that. Most of these were early on were word of mouth, but there was some marketing in some of these, but I don't have those costs handy. Fireproof in 2008 was made for $500,000 and made 33.4 million at the box office. Nice take there. Courageous in 2011 had a much healthier budget of $2 million, which is still very small for a film, especially a professionally shot film. That made a little more than Fireproof, $35.6 million. And War Room in 2015 had a little bit higher budget again with $3 million, and that made 73.9, basically $74 million at the box office on a $3 million budget. Huge, huge success for them. They came back in 2019 with Overcomer on a much healthier budget of $5 million. Again, still small for a professional budget film, but much healthier than obviously the $100,000 that they had for Facing the Giants. And that made $38 million, just barely over $38 million. So they have, you know, added to their budgets. In the case of War Room, it paid off big time. In the case of Overcomer, not as good, but still, a $38 million take on a $5 million budget is pretty decent, pretty good overall. So again, The Forge, coming back here to The Forge here in 2024. We don't know the budget of that. I don't know if that's gonna, you know, have jumped in similar lines with the way these previous Kendrick Brothers films have, whether this will be a $6 million budget or $7 million budget, or whether they drop back down after the lower take of Overcomer. I don't know. But right now, anyway, the box office is sitting at 21.4 million. So, you know, not bad. I think all things considered, The Forge is faring pretty well. And it may yet see a bump in ensuing weeks. You know, I hope it stays at the box office for weeks, or at least another month, or, you know, a month and a half yet to come, hopefully. So it's kind of interesting. Hoping for the best. It's a great film. If you haven't seen it yet, I know I say this every Forge video, but go see The Forge. Go support it while it's in theaters. Help keep that box office strong, which just bodes well for them, Kendrick Brothers and other Christian filmmakers, to continue to make films like this. The Forge is just a great film. I love it. So go support it. Go support it while you can. But anyway, I just want to take another chance to take a look at these latest numbers. We'll probably catch up again on it next week, see how it's doing then. Hopefully it doesn't slide or level off too soon, but hopefully it will continue to go on up. Right now it looks like it's going to end up probably more in the range of the way Courageous did in terms of box office take, maybe between Courageous and Overcomer. Don't think it's going to do War Room numbers, but who knows? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this today. Have a great rest of your day. And above all else, stay in God's Word. Blessings, y'all. Have a great one. Bye-bye.